My name is Eric S. South. I am a Republican candidate for Urbandale, District 40. I want to thank everybody for joining me with this town hall tonight. Tonight, I want to discuss a little bit about what we've learned from the coronavirus and the Constitution. During this unprecedented crisis, we've heard a lot of people say, well, this is violating our civil liberties, this is unconstitutional, or this violates our right to religious expression. And to a point, that is true. Now, in America, there's an undeniable fact that if you do not know your rights, you do not have your rights. Now, I'm sure most of you have seen a police show at some point, and you hear them reading what is called the Miranda rights. Now, this didn't happen until 1966, when an Arizona man by the name of Miranda successfully argued that he did not know what he could and could not do when he was arrested, and he took it to the Supreme Court and won. That is why we now have the Miranda rights. And to look at it another way, our Constitution is kind of like a warranty. If you buy a new car, you get a warranty. But if you don't sit down and read the warranty, you don't know what's covered and what isn't. And with that being said, back in 2004, the federal government passed a law called House Resolution 4818, and this text can be found in section 111B. Each educational institution that receives federal funds for a fiscal year shall hold an educational program on the United States Constitution on the date of September 17th of each year for the students served by the educational institution. This law does not distinguish between elementary, secondary, or college level institutions. It must be interpreted to all applied levels. The way I read that is that on September 17th, every year, every school that receives federal funding should read the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all of its amendments. That is how the citizenry will know what their rights are. And will also make it easier for the citizenry to realize when the government has overstepped its authority, whether it be the governor, the president, the House, the Senate, state level representatives, or even the judicial system. The theme of my campaign is back to basics. And one of the main ways I think we can get back to basics is by understanding the basics of our republic, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the subsequent amendments. Iowa, as yet, has not enacted legislation to make the Constitution available to be read in schools on September 17th. And that is an oversight that I believe needs to be addressed. Because yes, we hear people say, oh, well, speed cameras are a violation of our constitutional rights because it's illegal search and seizure and lack of due process. That's fine, and I completely agree with that. But the Constitution also shows us how to address these shortcomings. But if we don't know how, we can sit and talk about it, but we're limited on how we can address it. So that is the main thing that I noticed during this virus that I would like to see addressed as an education thing, or as a point of interest that needs to be addressed in our educational system. Because for Iowa to move forward, we need to get back to what got us here to begin with. And I find it best at my town halls if people are allowed to ask more questions than me talking, because that one question might trigger something that will be able to expound better on the answers I've already given. So with that, I will open up and be happy to answer any and all questions that you may have.
What's the status right now in our schools in terms of whether or not they're required to teach kids government by the time they graduate? When I was,
They
you had to do that.
they are required to teach government. My son just graduated from Urbandale 2 years ago, and he was able to required to take government his senior year. I did notice that in his education they covered a lot, but there was also a lot missing. It was sort of a general overview, and I think that for our citizens to be the best that we can be, we need to get a little more in depth and get a little more bite on what the Constitution really means. The federal Constitution says that all subsequent state constitutions has to follow the model of the federal Constitution. One thing that I know that the Iowa Constitution does not have is it does not have a right to bear arms amendment. There is no Second Amendment clause in the Iowa Constitution. Most people don't know the Iowa Constitution, so they are not aware that that is something that is missing from protections under the Iowa Constitution. Now, it does fall under the federal protections, but still, it would be nice to have something on the books for Iowa individually as well. Any other questions?
I think the question arises that if the United States Constitution already has it in there, is it redundant to have it in the Iowa Constitution?
No, because look at the situation we're in with the heartbeat bill that passed a couple of years ago, saying that life begins when the heartbeat begins. But the Iowa Constitution and the Iowa State Supreme Court decided that abortions were legal under the Iowa Constitution. That's why we're currently moving this constitutional amendment through the process to protect the unborn in the state of Iowa. I would say that having a protection for the Second Amendment on the books in Iowa specifically would be just that extra layer of protection in case the federal court were to decide to reinterpret the Second Amendment, or there would become a serious challenge at the state level. Having something on the books saying, yes, Americans and Iowans specifically have a right to keep and bear arms and also have the right to have sufficient ammunition on the Iowa books, I think would be beneficial. And that's a part of the federal Constitution that a lot of people miss. The Second Amendment to the Constitution says, yes, we have a right to keep and bear arms, but it also says that we are also to have sufficient ammunition as well. And that's a lot of people miss that part. So did that make sense?
Well, I can see your point, but at the same time, if the Supreme Court makes a ruling like it did with Roe v. Wade, you're still looking at a Supreme Court battle with all of that stuff. It's still going to go up in front of the higher court.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there's not a lot that can be done with that. But as we've seen just recently, I believe it was Justice Thomas made the observation that Supreme Court precedents was not supposed to set all future precedents, and that means that the Supreme Court, if new information or a new argument were to be brought forth, could readdress a previous court ruling. I remember the instance he was referring to. He was speaking specifically about Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the court can't overrule it if a test case is run up against it and they overrule it. I think the issue that you're going to be looking at is whenever a baby's already been born, like in the case of Virginia, and they say that's still part of abortion. No, that's a living, breathing human being. That's infanticide. And I think that's outside the laws as it is right now.
Right. And that's part of the reason why I have 4 pillars to my campaign. The first one is to defend the nuclear family. The second pillar is to defend the unborn or protect the unborn. And I would, if elected, would do everything I was able to do to advance the amendment process to make sure that the unborn in the most dangerously unprotected among us, the unborn, would have protection and citizenship. And with the, and back to what we were discussing about the Second Amendment in Iowa, I know that there's been several cases where the Iowa legislators tried to push a constitutional carry law through. And if we're going to push a constitutional carry through Iowa, where it's constitutionally your right to carry a firearm, we should have something on the books saying that Iowans have a right to keep and bear arms in the first place. So those two that they're doing try to dovetail together. So any other questions?
Eric.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is Bruce. I'm the guy who shows up at all these things that happens to work up at the State House. I'm a lobbyist up there.
Okay.
Yeah, Paul will let you know. I can be hard on you guys. A couple questions for you, actually. There is some issues that are going to have to be dealt with regarding the budget, which has really only got about a month left for the current fiscal year, and making a lot of changes in the budget for the upcoming year, most of which has been signed, but some of which is still yet to be dealt with, and some of which will have to be sequestered. And I've heard that word mentioned among some of my colleagues too, that we will probably see a sequestration bill as soon as we get up there. The good news is the drop in revenue is not as bad as we thought it was, and the revenue estimating conference today was, not full of everything doom and gloom. My question for you is, how would you address the the requests of different agencies, different branches of the government looking to keep their appropriations where they are, rather than cutting them by a specific percentage? And that's how a sequestration works, is to cut it each department's appropriation by a set percentage. I've seen the last one, I believe, was 11%. How would you handle that? How would you deal with constituent firms and just coming to you and asking you for budgeting to remain where it is?
I have long believed, and I have thought about this long and hard. I believe in a zero-based budget, where every year, every agency starts at zero. Then we review their expenditures from the previous year, and then we make adjustments for the cost of inflation. And then they can argue for that money, and if they can show probable cause where they will need to go above and beyond that, then that is something that could be addressed. The reason I believe in a zero-line budget is because I've known people in the course of my life that have worked for different branches of the federal government, and they've said that their department, one gentleman I can think of specifically worked for the DNR. They went to Las Vegas for 10 days because it was coming up to the end of the fiscal year and they still had a substantial amount of money left. And in order to get their appropriations and their cost increase, they had to show good cause for the money that they'd already spent the money they had. So instead of having that money and saying, hey, guess what? We came in under budget and, give us a pat on the back for that. They went on basically what could be qualified as a bender for 10 days to burn through that money so they could show a need for the increase the following year. As a baseline zero budget, I believe that each agency starts out equal, they get their money, and then have a provision written in to where if coming up towards the end of the budget, or if something unforeseen happens like this coronavirus, then there would be a way to address that in the future. But I think that a zero baseline budget would be the way to go, because every month I don't get to start my budget by saying, okay, I get an automatic 11% increase. I have my money that I make that I have to spend on my bills. And if I have money left over at the end of the month, I don't get to go on a bender or make a bunch of frivolous purchases so I can have more money the next month. And I believe the federal government and the state government, local government, all the way down to the city councils should follow the model that the individual citizens have to follow. And does that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
Actually, it does, Eric. My friends Carly Fiorina and Steve Forbes would be very proud of you because they have both advocated for zero-based budgeting for a long time. Plus, they actually teach it at Drake at the MPA school. And,
another way that I would believe, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, that's okay. If I could go to the second question. Your opponent in this race, the incumbent, I've known John for quite a while, because I've been up at the State House for the last 11 years. And one of the things that he has worked on up there is, medical cannabis. And he's actually, being a pharmacist, he understands, what it really should be, how a lot of it should work. And he also understands the stupidity of some of the restrictions that were put on it by the previous bill. I went to the bill signing for that. I was one of the guys who lobbied for it, but there were some things in there that we didn't like. I lobbied for the Iowa Hemp Industries Association, and they are in favor of the medical cannabis. Their director has some experience in that. How do you feel about it? Do you think that we should proceed with the medical cannabis? The research is coming in well. There's new things happening on the hemp side with manufacturing. And I know of about 5 different companies that want to come to Iowa to manufacture, but because of our restrictions, they will not come. That's a whole bunch of jobs. And considering what's been happening with employment in some industries here, we could use them. What is your position?
Well, actually, I will admit, when the medical cannabis first was brought up, I was opposed to it in every sense of the word. But as you said, there's been new research, and I have actually reversed my position on that, and I would be in favor of medical cannabis, but not for the reasons that a lot of other people would think. I am a very strong man of faith, and I began to realize that we've had pharmaceuticals as we know it now for about 50 years. But people have been alive for thousands of years before that, and they relied on natural remedies to take care of a lot of the ailments that we now have prescriptions for. And as I did my research, as you pointed out in the cannabis research, and specifically the medical cannabis research is coming out showing that it has immense benefits. That was actually what caused me to reverse my position, and I would be in favor of medical cannabis with little to no restrictions, as long as it was handled in a responsible way at the user end. Does that answer your question?
Actually, it does very well. Thanks, Eric. If you are elected in there, I will be up there to twist your arm about it come January.
So yeah, that was one thing that I was able to readjust and reevaluate my position on the subject. And I know a lot of people that think that people such as myself that are very strong in their Christian faith are inflexible, that once they make their mind up, that's the way it is. And I like to believe that I am not that type of person, that if you can give me compelling evidence that does not just overtly violate my base principles, I am willing to consider it. And cannabis was one of those subjects that was able to give me the compelling evidence without violating my core principles and beliefs.
I'd like to point something out that when we look at cannabis, also hemp, not the stuff that gets you high, but the hemp is actually being used to make bricks that are virtually earthquake proof, hempcrete, as well as paper, where you're spawning different industries as a result of that. And I have talked to some people that have come through here. A guy out of Kansas was trying to check our laws. There's at least 3 Oregon companies where they've just saturated the market in Oregon that would love to move to Iowa and set up shop here right now. That can mean a lot of businesses. We could be making different construction materials as well as a paper industry that wouldn't compromise the forest in any way.
Actually, the one biggest use that I have found that I enjoy the idea of transferring to a cannabis base would be recyclables, water bottles, plastic bags, things like that. All that can be made from hemp, and it has a very rapid decomposition rate, leaves virtually no fingerprint, and we can get a better yield out of it. You were referring to hemp paper. Well, we can get, I think one statistic I heard, 40% more paper from an acre of hemp than we can from an acre of trees.
That's right.
And with hemp, you also have a faster turnaround time. A tree takes 25 or 30 years. A crop of hemp can be rotated in 18 months, I've heard, give or take. So yeah, hemp-based manufacturing in Iowa for a lot of different industries, whether it be plastic bottles and recycling, paper, I think would be a very wise step in the direction of more sustainability.
Yeah, Eric, among other things that the manufacturers that our association has been talking to is actually two different companies that make hemp fabrics used in office equipment, office chairs, and that sort of thing. Han Industries or Muscatine actually already is using the product. We would also be talking to, we are also talking to companies that are in the building materials that make the flooring. That the hemp flooring that's made from the hemp lumber actually is twice as hard as oak, and the wallboard that is made from hemp is apparently nearly mold proof. And so it's products like that coming out of Iowa that I think could really help our industrial base.
Right, and it marries the best of both worlds because Iowa has been and always will be a heavily agricultural state, but we also have a good manufacturing base. So if we were able to marry hemp production with hemp manufacturing, I think it would be the best of both worlds. It would create a lot of jobs, and it would take some stress off of other industries. I mean, some farmers that are having a hard time with their corn crops will be able to switch to hemp, and hemp has a higher sale value. It would be a good third alternative for the farmers. And if I remember right, hemp is also a cover crop, which means it grows great in the wintertime.
Yeah, the only thing we got to do now is get rid of that 40-acre, maximum field per farmer. And get it out. One of the people that we work with is growing something in the neighborhood of 6,000 acres of it, and
that goes back to one of my arguments of getting back to basics. The government needs to be big enough to be able to do its job, and not so big that it can tell you how to do yours. And in this instance, I think the government has overstepped its bounds when saying, yes, you can grow it, but we're going to tell you how much and where you can plant it. If a farmer can make twice as much of a crop of hemp as he can a crop of corn, I say that should be his right.
Oh, sure.
And hemp, I also think, would be a great way to offset the small family farms in competing with the big corporate farms, because the small family farmer just doesn't have the acreage to be able to plant the corn or soybean to be able to effectively compete with the big corporate factory farms. Allow the small family farmers to start growing hemp. Now they've got a fighting chance to be able to go up against the big boys when it comes time for the crop reports.
They're not going to get clobbered by Chinese sanctions either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Eric, what's your overall, what's the business you're in right now? Tell me a little bit about your background. Business qualifications, for running.
Well, when people talk about qualifications for running, I remember our founding fathers. 1 out of 4 men at the Constitutional Convention were homeschooled. Most of them were small business owners or just people that had a passion for what they saw they wanted a country to become. My background is I spent over a decade in food service. I have been at various levels of leadership since I was 16 years old. I have been shift lead. I've been store manager. I have been leader of different organizations. I'm very active in my fellowship. I lead a fellowship group. A couple of years ago, at the blessing of my pastor, I did 2 years of research for a course called History in the Making, a Biblical Approach to Government and Politics. I then spent 40 weeks teaching that course, and it covered everything from a biblical perspective, from immigration to welfare to taxes to military service. So with all that put together, plus people have listened to me talk over the years, and I've had Democrats, Republicans, independents, all like what I have to say. And it was actually suggested some years ago that I try running for office. So as far as qualifications, I think having a clear vision and the passion to see that vision through matter more than having a list of accomplishments or accolades or 3 letters behind your name like PhD. I think a passion and a vision matters more than accolades and accomplishments, because if you have a passion, you're going to see it through.
Okay, do you have a college degree at all, though? I mean,
I'm actually a high school dropout.
okay.
I dropped out at halfway through my sophomore year to go take a job to become a department manager at a toy store in West Des Moines when I was 16 years old. I did go back and get my GED. But again, just because I don't have a traditional high school diploma, just because I haven't set foot in a college, doesn't mean that I don't have some ideas. You have heard my ideas tonight, and from the responses, it sounds like you agree with them. I had a previous town hall meeting that was sponsored by the Trump campaign, had a wonderful response from that. So accomplishments and all these other things sometimes to me don't matter as much as having a vision and willing to go there.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to know what business you're running right now. What are you doing for a living right now?
What am I doing right now? I am a public safety and security officer for a local corporation here in town. I will not say which one.
Okay.
But I have a number of certificates in public safety and security. I've taken a number of FEMA courses on disaster preparedness, disaster communications. All the certificates that I have from FEMA are actually available on my website, southonthehouse.com.
Okay.
So I do have some study in other areas besides what I've done. And I do have some certificates showing that I have put forth the effort to expand my knowledge base beyond what I have. So, and if I did not mean to come off harsh, if that's how I sounded, just
No,
I'm
not
very
at all.
passionate about this.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to bug out right now. I just wanted to be able to write an article on you for the newsletter.
All right. Well, I appreciate you stopping by.
Okay. All right.
And have a good rest of the night.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. So does anybody else have any questions? Nothing at all? I've done that good a job and it's only been a half an hour? Really? So earlier tonight, we were discussing the Constitution. And there's one part of the Constitution of the First Amendment that I personally am looking forward to should I be elected. And that is the right to petition your leaders. The reason I say I'm looking forward to that is because I want to hear from the people I represent. I don't want to go up there with my ideas and just run with it. I want to hear from the people I represent. I mean, I am there to serve them. I am their employee.
Testing.
Yes, sir. What's going on?
Oh, my microphone works now?
Yeah, how's it going tonight?
Okay. Let's see. Now, what was my question? Oh, what do you think? What do you think ought to be done about the emergency powers law?
Okay, that's a very broad question. Could you narrow it down a little bit?
Have you read the emergency powers law? It's about 4 or 5 pages.
I have not had the opportunity to read the whole thing, no, unfortunately. I do know that some parts of it is a very extreme overreach and violation of the individual citizen's rights. And I know that they enacted that as a way to sort of keep control in an absolute disaster situation.
Well, let me suggest what some of my concerns are about it and see if if they make sense to you.
Okay.
Um, I don't think there's been an emergency in Iowa history before where the facts that were the factual basis for government action were so much in dispute. I mean, if a tornado comes through, well, you don't worry about whether there's been damage. But
Right.
with this medical thing, we have the governor interacting with a handful of official doctors that are in touch with a lot of other doctors, but don't think that they've been in really, we have these internet experts, and they're qualified experts saying things which challenge the most fundamental premise as accepted by the governor. And we don't have a place where the public can listen to the both sides interact, and so they can judge, we can judge for ourselves. And I think that ought to be corrected. And I think the governor ought to, and it ought to be in the law that when the governor makes a statement, a public statement about what she's doing about the emergency, that there ought to be included an invitation for public comment and especially expertise, so that and that there ought to be an encouragement for people who submit comment to interact with each other, to address each other's concerns. I don't think that would necessarily place a burden on anyone to have to be responsible for reading and processing all the information that comes in, but just the existence of that information all in one place would, I think, be very helpful.
Absolutely. The more information to the individual citizen, the better. As far as some of the declarations made during this recent health crisis, I will agree. When we heard, well, we have X number of new cases popping up. Okay. Can you quantify that though? Okay, so we have 79 new cases in Iowa. But what percentage of that is out of testing? So if we have 79 new cases, but we have 3,000 tests, that's not even 1% of the total number of tests showing up as new positive cases. So yeah, I do think there needs to be a way to quantify the information being put out. And yes, people are able to, when properly informed, make the decisions that best fit their lives. And while the governor did, in my opinion, the best job she could with the information and the experts she had at hand, there was definitely room for improvement. And I believe that going forward, should I be elected, that we should go back, take a look at how this situation was handled, and then make the necessary judgments, adjustments to the legislation as needed. I'm not going to sit from the outside looking in and say, well, we need to change this out or the other, because I'm not privy to the fine details. But addressing the Emergency Powers Act and how it was handled during this crisis and future crises is something that I do believe needs to be addressed, which would be in the best interest of all Iowans. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, another problem with the existing law is it allows the governor to require people to be inoculated, quarantined, and treated who aren't even sick.
Mhm.
And one of the exceptions is, well, if unless there's reasonable concern that there might be harm from an inoculation, but that's
Right.
not defined, so no one, so who decides whether it's reasonable? And I think it ought to be clarified so that if someone is resisting an inoculation and they can cite credible or serious concerns raised by licensed physicians, that ought to qualify.
Mhm. Well, I, for myself, I don't get flu shots. I've never had a flu shot in my life, and I can't because I have an egg allergy.
Mm.
So that is the discernible risk that I've been told by medical professionals that if I get a flu shot, even if I'm in a fully equipped trauma ward, I'm dead because I would go into anaphylactic shock and there would be nothing they could do to stop me.
Hmm.
I will take it one step further with the forced inoculation. If these vaccines are everything people say they are, then why is everybody forced to get them? If somebody chooses to not get inoculated for COVID-19 or polio or anthrax or whatever else, why should the people that have gotten the inoculation worry? If these vaccines are everything that they say they are, then the people that get it shouldn't worry about the ones that don't, because it's all those of us that don't get those inoculations. We're putting our own health at risk. But if these vaccines aren't what they say they are, then why force them on us in the first place?
Now, fortunately, the governor has not abused that particular aspect of her power, but a reason to want to modify these powers now that they've been brought to our attention is not to punish our governor, but to worry about what a future Democrat governor might do.
And yes, we can say from past history that a Democrat might be more likely to take that power and abuse it. With that being said, though, under the right circumstances, I think that even the most stable of persons in their own mind could justify taking that to an extreme, even if the cause wasn't there. So I wouldn't lay that at the feet of just Democrats, because I can think of a few Republicans that might be tempted to run away with that same power. But yes, we do need to rein that in, and we do need to have some modifications on it. I would not be entirely opposed to doing something with that like Congress did with the Wars Powers Act to the president. The president cannot go to war without an authorization from Congress. Subsequently, something like that could happen here in the state where the governor declares an emergency powers, but then certain aspects of that has to have congressional approval before they're able to carry through with it. The subsequent forced inoculation being one of them. Did that answer your question, or is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your reading of the heartbeat bill and its application to the Second Amendment, I don't think is correct, because when the court created what's the words made it a fundamental right to abortion,
Mhm.
they were creating technically a greater right than the U.S. Supreme Court had created.
Right.
If what the court in Iowa does not have the right to do is to say that we have is to create a weaker right than we have at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that reason, I think the Second Amendment powers that we have, or protection we have at the federal level, is protects us pretty well. Not to say that I'm sure there is not an advantage to having it redone it in the Iowa Constitution. Also, I'm just not sure what the advantage would be. Back to the heartbeat bill, what is missing in the logic of all that is that no one ever, including the pro-life side, no one ever brought up, well, what about the rights of babies to live?
Oh, no, that's, I will not get too strong into my faith, but there are things that I can bring up that show that babies do have a right to exist, that they do have a right to decide whether they live or die. In my previous town hall, I was very strong in demonstrating my faith and my biblical principles. Tonight, I wanted to show that I can be a candidate that connects with people that aren't maybe of the strongest faith as I am, but still have a conservative mindset. So I do appreciate that question. And yeah, the part of the addressing the baby's wants and needs, yes, that hasn't been addressed. And there are some areas that the pro-life and the anti-abortion, because those two are actually two separate entities, have not addressed. And to help meet in the middle, I think that those are things that do need to be addressed in the future. And I wasn't trying to, the way I understand your question was, I'm not trying to show the similarities between the heartbeat bill and the Second Amendment. I was just trying to demonstrate that there were two separate areas of the Iowa Constitution that I felt needed to be addressed because of something at the federal level. So I was not trying to link those two together. And if that's the way it sounded, then I'm sorry. And that is something I will address in the future. So did that answer your question on that?
I reckon. I actually wrote a book called How States Can Outlaw Abortion in a Way That Survives Courts. I'd like to get that information to you.
Okay, well, you can email me at southinthehouse@gmail.com.
South End what?
South in the house,
Oh,
all one word, @gmail.com.
all right.
Or if it's too large to email, you can contact me through the email, and then I will give you my physical address.
All right.
All right. But that I'm one of those people that I have a passion for learning. I'm one of those people that believe that if you stop learning, you die long before your body gives out. You should always be learning, always looking for something new. So I welcome any information that I can get. Does anybody else have any questions, or do you have another question?
Well, if no one else has a question, I'd love to hear what you have to say, what you've learned about what the Bible says about immigration.
Okay, well, the immigration in the Bible breaks down into three distinct categories. How the Israelites were to treat the immigrants, how the law pertained to the immigrants, and what was expected from the immigrants. Now, there are some prominent Christian leaders, nationally recognized Christian leaders, that said that immigration is not a biblical issue. But during my studies, I found no less than 47 references to immigrant, strangers, and foreigners just in the Mosaic Law. And it breaks down into three categories. The first one is that the Israelites were to treat the immigrants with respect because they were to remember that they were immigrants in Egypt and remember how they were treated. The second area is one law for the immigrant and for the natural born. So if it's murder to a Jew, it's murder to everybody living in the nation of Israel. The third area is the one that some would consider the most controversial, which is assimilation. It says in the Mosaic Law, and I'll use Passover as an example, that if a stranger or a foreigner wanted to participate in Passover, then all the males of his household must be circumcised. And then they would be recognized as those born of the land and would be able to participate in the feasts. So the three areas that the Bible talks about immigration is one law for everybody, treat the immigrants well, and for the immigrant to enjoy all that society has to offer, they must assimilate.
All right, now it's Exodus 12, verses 43 through 50 that has that statement about one law for the natural-born citizen as well as for the immigrant. And preceding that is the example of requiring circumcision as a condition for participation in the Passover.
Yep.
And I think the general principle we may extract from that is that when immigrants can meet the condition, when they have the qualifications that citizens have, then they should have the same rights as citizens.
Exactly. Assimilate. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Okay. I use the word assimilate because, as I stated earlier, I spent over a decade in food service, and I had an opportunity to work with a lot of immigrants, not just Latino, but Bosnian and a few other nationalities as well. And the one thing that I ran into was they would always refer to where they came from as their home country. They never called America home. They were just staying here. I know of Latino immigrants that came here, worked their butts off for 10 years, and then moved back to Mexico and lived like a king because they were able to get a good job up here. And all that money that they sent back to their home country is money that was taken out of the Iowa economy. And that's why in my previous town hall, I recommended that there were a few things that I'd like to see to address that. One of them be a remittance tax, where all money over a set dollar amount sent to any nation outside of America should have to pay a remittance tax, whether it be 10 or 15%. Because if you have somebody living in America or living in Iowa and they're, say, sending $1,000 a month to their mother in Mexico City, well, that's $12,000 a year. If they're here for 10 years, that's $120,000 that's not going into the Iowa economy. And if we could get 10 or 12 or 15% of that, it's not hurting them that much, but it's still putting more money back into the Iowa economy, because that immigrant, instead of spending all that money here like a natural born would, they are basically supporting somebody else's economy. And with that being said, also, the scripture says that we are to treat the stranger and foreigner equally. Can we really say we do that if we have a restaurant where immigrants are paid $8 an hour, but African American or Caucasian would make $10 or $11 an hour? So you see, there's a large discrepancy there, and it's something that I think needs to be addressed on a much larger scale.
As far as the remittance tax, it's an interesting idea. One thing that I see as how it would actually be accepted by immigrants themselves is that if it could result in more people being allowed to come here legally as a trade-off, it would be worth it to them. As for the economic loss to ourselves from remittances, I'm not sure that would be any different than when Christians send contributions to missions.
No, there's not a lot of difference there. That I will completely agree with. And as a man of faith, this is going to sound very strange, but I have often looked at our tax code, both state and federal, and you are able to write your contributions off your taxes to charitable organizations such as your church, missions, whatever. But Jesus said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar, and give unto God's what is God's. Are we really giving to God what is God's if we can turn around and write it off what we owe Caesar? And that is something that I myself have argued with for years. But the law says that I can, so I do. But it's still, that question stands.
Let me tell you my thoughts on it. Peter came to Jesus and said, the tax collector's here. He wants the temple tax. And Jesus says, well, what do you think, Peter? Do you think we really owe it? Who do kings pay? Let's see, do kings pay?
Do citizens pay taxes?
Yeah, do the children of kings pay taxes to the kings?
Yeah.
No, they're exempt. And so therefore we should be too. However, this is a battle we're going to fight in a future century. Go ahead and pay it.
Right.
So,
Go get the first fish, open its mouth, and there'll be a coin to pay the tax.
so back then, the meaning, Jesus' meaning was Jesus is the source of healing, of protection, of everything that is the function of church. So why should Jesus himself have to pay taxes to a church which is much less efficient?
Mhm.
And this principle applies today. Churches are the source of schools, hospitals, protection in the time of war, and so they should not be paying their money to a government which would spend it far less efficiently. So I think that that principle of Jesus is the philosophical justification for tax exemption for nonprofits and churches.
Right. Right. And that's not where I was going. My thing is that should I, as a private citizen, be able to write my contributions to my church off my taxes?
Well, another point from Scripture is in Ezekiel. It gives the ideal budget of the federal of the executive, and it's like between 1% and 2% of 3 commodities, and that's it. That's the whole federal budget in an ideal government. And then there's 10% that goes to the Levitical priesthood, and that covers both church and the judiciary and the police force.
Mhm.
And so about 12% is God's idea of for total church tithing plus government.
Right. Yeah.
And now we're paying 30 or 40% taxes, depending on how
Mhm.
much you count. And then the church is expecting another 10%.
Yeah.
And,
And
and the church is telling you, now don't get involved in government on church premises.
and actually, unfortunately, a lot of churches are apprehensive to get involved in government because of the Johnson Amendment.
Which has been repealed, hasn't it?
Not entirely. President Trump signed an executive order taking the bite out of it, but only the federal Congress can actually take that off and write over it, kind of like they did with prohibition, where they passed another amendment banning prohibition. They'd have to do the same thing with the Johnson Amendment. They'd have to pass future legislation to actually take it off the books. But no, Trump did sign an executive order taking the teeth out of it.
In 1986, I created a nonprofit corporation, and the official purposes of it was to demonstrate how much political activity a nonprofit or a church could engage in and still be in compliance with the Johnson Amendment.
Mhm.
And then I laid out what I thought that was, and it was approved both the state and federal level. And it was like nonpartisan information is unlimited. A
Mhm.
pastor could allow both candidates to come up and fill and share the pulpit every Sunday.
Yep.
Also, the church could even give 10%, between 10% and 20% of its financial resources and its time to actually endorsing candidates. Now, which is way more than I even want anyone to do. But the point is, that's all an excuse. There's nothing limiting churches from giving nonpartisan information and allowing its own members to share information.
Yeah, absolutely. The scare tactics that have been used to keep the church from speaking up have been really remarkable in the last, I'd say, probably 15 to 20 years. And it's only getting worse from what I see. And any other questions? Because this has been a great conversation, but I'm looking at the time. We got about 4 minutes left. So does anybody else have any other questions? Or can we go ahead and close for the night?
Looks like Keith and Bill have the pictures are gone. The names are still there. Are they still there?
I don't know. Sarah, are you able to see? Are they still active? You were the one hosting this.
Who are they?
Oh, there's Keith.
Oh, well, Keith's back. Have you heard from Bill at all?
No, he only has a camera.
Okay. So looking at the time, we have about 4 minutes left. Did we have any other questions?
Oh, doing good.
All right.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then with your permission, we're going to go ahead and close this out for the night. I do thank all the questions and comments and the overall direction of the conversation. I felt it was very productive. I do want to point out that everything that I've said today is in no way to be construed as a promise. A man's word is his bond. So the only thing I promise is to keep my vision and to work with the other people in the Capitol to help these visions come to pass.
Your email once again?
southinthehouse@gmail.com.
All right.
And that's all one word. So I want to thank you everybody for participating. And just to let you know, I do tentatively have one more of these scheduled for Monday night, right before the primaries, again at 6:30. So if you've enjoyed this conversation, let your friends and family know, and we'll see everybody Monday. Have a good weekend.
How much money have you raised?
Not a lot, because in all honesty, I haven't done any fundraising. With the virus and everything else has gone on, I was more focused on making sure the people of Urbandale was able to pay the rent and utilities and have food on the table. Once the primaries are over and everything opens up and people are able to get back to work, should I win the primaries on Tuesday, then I will start fundraising. But right now, my focus has just been on making sure that the people that I am hoping to represent can carry on with their normal lives.
You have a primary opponent?
Yes, I do. His name is John Cohen.
Okay.
So, but no, I have not done any fundraising, and what little I have has gone to basically keeping my website going and keeping Zoom on. So that has been my primary focus. I have a huge digital footprint. Part of the reason why I'm doing these digital town halls is because a lot of people are still apprehensive about large meetings, even though we're opening up and everybody says it's safe to go back to normal. A lot of people are still apprehensive about it. And with this digital footprint, I have a chance to get out, to let people know, but still let them feel safe and not get them into large groups where they could feel uneasy, but they felt they had to be there to hear what I had to say. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so we are coming up on the end of time. So again, I thank everybody for participating. And please have a great night and stay healthy, stay blessed, and have a great weekend.